Good afternoon. My name is Lawrence Ziese. This past academic year, I taught a combined 4th and 5th grade STEAM classroom at Los Angeles Unified School District's Art Magnet School. This talk presents a needs assessment on instructional design conditions and the basic psychological needs of these students, completed for EDUC 522 at the University of San Diego. Instructional design is not decoration. The choices a teacher makes about how time is divided across lecture, structured task, movement, and reflection sets the condition for whether a student can experience the classroom as a place that fits them. My classroom was mixed ability. Neurodiverse, twice exceptional, and gifted students shared the same 60 minutes. The premise of the study is simple. What students themselves report about their classroom is the most direct read on whether these conditions are meeting their needs. When the conditions misfit how the student processes, motivation and learning both erode. My lens is the self-determination theory. Deci and Ryan in 2000 argued that motivation and well-being rest on 3 innate psychological needs: autonomy, the sense that what you do is freely chosen; competence, the sense that you are effective at your work; and relatedness, the sense that you are connected to the people around you. Self-determination theory names what should happen in a student's experience. It does not name the instructional conditions that produce it. So I built a framework that does. The consistent student engagement and Student Disruption and Interruption framework developed an earlier coursework named 6 Observable Classroom Variables. 3 tend to raise consistent student engagement, instructional variety, movement and tactile work, and reflection time. 3 tend to raise distraction and interruption, lecture time, rigid structured class time, and the uninterrupted length of any single activity. The word framework is deliberate. It is a starting point for diagnosis, not a prescription. The two map onto each other. Autonomy emerges from scaffold reflection, reflection that sits inside a task structure rather than floating free. Competence emerges from a clear task flow, where the path through the work is visible. Relatedness emerges from the inquiry openings a well-designed task creates, the small movements where a task's own question surfaces. That leads to my research question, which has 2 parts. Primarily in the classroom, how do students' perception of instructional design conditions relate to their reported satisfaction of autonomy, competence, and relatedness? And secondly, do these relationships differ for students whose processing styles fall outside the school's extroversion norms, including students with ADHD symptoms? The second question is where the equity stakes of this work sit. 3 studies frame the inquiry. Rogers and Tannick in 2018 surveyed 117 children and found that those with elevated ADHD symptoms scored significantly lower on all 3 needs, with the largest gap on competence. They named the gap. Nyman and Ryan in 2009 argued that autonomy, support, structure, and teacher involvement each feed 3 needs independently. They named the lever. And they show that instructional design, not just teacher warmth, is what moves the needle. Rizzo and colleagues in 2025 reviewed 19 studies of twice exceptional learners and found that engagement collapses when classrooms understimulate. They named the mechanism. Together they tell me what to look for and why it matters. A word on the methods. This study used simulated respondent data, calibrated to published LAUSD elementary statistics. No real 4th or 5th graders were surveyed. 2 constraints made live administration inappropriate. The survey lived on University of San Diego's Workspace account that only USD email addresses can reach, which my students could not have. And the study window fell on the last 2 weeks of the year. After state testing, when a research survey would have put data collection ahead of student well-being. The simulation was reviewed and approved before I ran it. The simulated pool was 22 students, one combined classroom with distributions matched to LAUSD figures, half 4th grade, half 5th, gender roughly balanced. About a fifth of the students carried an IEP, a 504, or some form of extra help. Home language split about evenly between English and Spanish. One honest caveat: the simulation drew each item independently. It did not model relationships between demographics and responses, so it supposed descriptive practice and nothing inferential. The instrument was a 5-item Likert scale, 1 to 5, plus 4 demographic items. The items were adapted from the classroom environmental scale used by Rogers and Tannock, and then mapped to the 3 needs. Borrowing validated items is a deliberate reliability move. The demographic items followed inclusive design guidance. Everyone's skippable, each with a prefer not to say option. A codebook documents the calibration and the limits. Small design decisions matter here because the downstream stakes are human. Now the findings. The items means sorted clearly by need. Relatedness led. The item "My teacher understands me" scored highest at 4.18, with the tightest spread of all 5. The "I get along with my teacher" followed closely behind. Relatedness was landing, and landing consistently. Competence was the soft spot. The item "I am doing a good job" sat lowest at 3.55. It was the only item to settle at a 3 rather than a 4, and it was the most variable of the 5. Students in that room were least certain about whether they were succeeding. That is finding 1 and finding 2. There was a signal underneath the averages. On the item "I get along with my teacher," students with a support plan answered lower and far less consistently than their peers. The mean dropped from 4.23 to 3.5, and the spread nearly doubled. For students with a support plan, relatedness was far less settled. This speaks directly to my secondary question about students with processing styles fell outside the student norms. The subgroup was small, 6 students, so I report it as a question for further study, not a finding I should stake behind as a claim. What do the findings ask me to design for, and how do they sit against the literature? 3 moves. First, build on relatedness. Relatedness landed strongest, which is what Deci and Ryan in 2009 would predict when teacher involvement is present. That lever was already working, so the job going forward is to protect and extend it, not rebuild it. Second, engineer competence. Competence was the soft spot here, and that is the same need Rogers and Tannock in 2018 found most depressed for teachers with attention differences. In the framework, competence reads as clear task flow, and Pogo's stepwise structure with explicit success criteria targets it directly. Rizzo and colleagues in 2025 sharpened the point. For twice exceptional learners, the fix is not easier work, but appropriately challenging work, because understimulation is what drives disengagement. Third, design for the margins. The support plan gap echoes both my secondary question and Rogers and Tannock's central finding, that some students have their needs met less. Rotating Pogo roles distribute participation so that the relatedness does not depend on matching the room's extroversion norm. And Gao and colleagues in 2012 found that teachers affect reach students through classroom practice, which is the argument for engineering practice rather than relying on disposition. The limits are real. The samples are small, 22 overall and 6 in the subgroup, so everything here is descriptive and carries no inferential power. A single item carried the competence construct, which may overstate how unstable it looks. Self-report from students about how their own teacher invites social desirability bias. The data was one snapshot in time. And the framework's equation weights are observational heuristicks, built for diagnostics, not validated coefficients. Descriptives describe. They do not establish relationships. Full references are on the final slide formatted in APA. My name is Ziese, and thank you for listening.